subscribe, like, comment, share.
Elise grumbled. Yeah, because I had to wait for you. The nerve of you to mock me, Alexander chuckled. So this is my fault, Elise shot him a glare. Of course it is. Alexander quickly stopped her from talking by filling her lunchbox up with more food. Thanks for the wait. Have some more. Elise ignored him and only put her cutlery down after finishing her dinner. At this moment, Alexander's phone rang. It was his alarm, actually. Since it was Wednesday, it was time for his revision class with Sarah. I might be home late. I have something to do. I'll get the driver to take you home if you want. It's fine, just go ahead. I'll go home by myself. Be careful then. Call me if you need anything. He went back to his desk, booted up his PC, and tried to contact Sarah. Elise's phone started beeping, and she took her phone out. When she saw his message, she realized it was time for her class, so she glanced at him and kept her phone. I'll be going home now. She got up. See you later. Sure, then. He called his employee. Tell the driver to send Elise home. Thanks. She went out of the office and texted Alexander. Class is delayed by half an hour tonight. Talk to you later. Alexander gave her an okay emoji and closed his laptop, then went through his documents. Right after she arrived home, she went to her room, closed the door, and booted her PC up. It had been a while since Alexander started learning Irisian from her. He was a fast learner and managed to grasp a lot of the concepts with just a few pointers. The class went by in a flash. Just when she was about to go offline, he texted. They sent me an email. I need your help with it, Elise texted. Send it to my email. A minute later, Elise got a new email. She logged into her account and skimmed through it before telling him its gist. They said the first phase went well. They are planning on sending a representative to Athesian next week to talk about the second phase and its plans. Alexander didn't reply immediately. In fact, he was taking his own sweet time, but she wasn't in a hurry. Elise stretched her arm and went downstairs to get herself a glass of milk. When she came out of the kitchen, she bumped into Jack, who just came back. Jack wasn't looking too well and seemed tired. He seldom came back home because of his work, but he had been coming home a lot over the last couple of days. Still up? He asked. I was thirsty, so I came out to get some milk. Jack went upstairs without saying another word. After he was gone, she remembered the song he wrote, and she rummaged through her pocket. Oh, it's still there. Then, she went upstairs and glanced at Alexander's reply. Tell me the time, and I need you there to translate if it's fine with you. Elise looked at the date. It was a Saturday, so she agreed to it. Hey, money is money. Sure. She turned her PC off and took out the unfinished song to finish modifying it. It took her forever to get out of bed the next day. The modification had gone on late into the night, but luckily, she finished it, and she even added some lyrics into it, turning it into a new song. When she came down, Matthew was waiting for her in the living room. Morning, Elise, he greeted her with a smile. Ever since he confessed to her, Elise had been avoiding him. If it weren't because of Jonah telling them to take turns sending her to school, she wouldn't even talk to him. Good morning, Elise greeted back, but obviously, she was being distant. However, Matthew ignored it and pulled out a chair for her. Here, dig in. She sat down and finished her breakfast quickly. Elise then took her bag and left, while Matthew quickly followed her. They said nothing to each other the whole way. Elise was doing her math questions, while Matthew was trying to find a chance to talk. However, Elise was ignoring him, so he pursed his lips and thought for a while before calling her name. After a pause, he said, Sorry. I might have been rash back then. Elise smiled at him politely. It's in the past now. It's fine, Matthew continued. I'm sorry, Elise. I never thought I'd cause you so much trouble. I know you're concentrating on your studies so you're not in a hurry to get a boyfriend, or maybe you just don't like me, but either way, can we go back to how we used to be? Just pretend it never happened, alright? Elise heaved a sigh of relief after hearing that, but that also proved that Alexander was right. He is trying to get closer to me because he wants something else. Sure. After a pause, she added. The company needs all the manpower it has right now. If you're busy, you don't have to send me to school. Matthew didn't take that offer. Grandpa told us we must send you to school no matter how busy we are, damn it. Jonah was the only reason she couldn't refuse him. Fine. Since Grandpa Griffith wants this, there's no point in arguing. She got out of the car and went into the school, but someone suddenly tapped on her shoulder. When Elise turned around, she saw Samantha and Riley behind her. You were in your head. We noticed you spacing out, Riley said. Elise smiled. I was just thinking about the solution. For that question yesterday, thanks to you, I finally found the solution, Riley smacked her head in fake annoyance. Man, you top students are always thinking about homework, huh? Samantha sighed. That's why they are top students and we are not, Elise put her hands on their shoulders. Just kidding. I just wanted to motivate you two. Samantha and Riley looked at each other before pouncing on Elise and went toward their classroom. Unbeknownst to them, Michaela was standing not far away. When she saw the girls looking so happy together, she felt jealous for some reason. Oh right. Elise, I need to tell you something. Samantha suddenly held Elise's hand and lowered her voice. Phoenix Entertainment was recruiting actors for a new drama set in the ancient era, so I sent in my application, but you know what? They told me to go for the audition this afternoon. I was going to ask Riley to come with me but she has some personal matters to settle, so can you come with me instead? Samantha was looking at her expectantly. Since it was just a self-study session that afternoon, Elise agreed. Sure. I'll take the afternoon off then, that delighted Samantha. All right. See you. Later, after they had lunch, Samantha grabbed Elise and took a cab to Phoenix Entertainment. Elise thought the company sounded familiar, but when she came to the front door, she realized that it was Jack's agency. Just when she was immersed in her thoughts, Samantha grabbed her arm and snapped her out of it. Hurry up, Elise. It's starting in 20 minutes. We don't want to be late. They went into the elevator. There was already a guy wearing a cap in there when they came in. When he saw them, the guy lowered his cap. Elise thought he looked familiar, but she couldn't remember who he was. It wasn't after she got out and saw the posters on the corridor did she realize who the man was. Hey, that's the new Best Actor Ernest. Hi, may I know where's the audition for Truest Love, Samantha? Asked a crew member. The crew member pointed to the right. Walk down this corridor to the end. It's in the last room, thanks. Samantha took Elise and went down the corridor. There were a lot of people auditioning. When Samantha took her number, it was around 50, so they had to wait for a few hours. I would have come a bit later if I knew it would drag on this long, Elise calmed her down by saying, it's fine. That means you can be more prepared. Read your script. Samantha looked at the script she just got. Let's go there then. You can help me out. They went to the less crowded balcony, and Samantha combed through the script. At the same time, Jack was playing some games on the couch in the room next door while his manager was scrolling through some data, looking worried. Jack, your numbers have plummeted. You dropped out of the top 5 on trending and the popularity ranking. You used to be in the top 3. Even your songs dropped out of the top 20 on the search list, Jack answered calmly. It's normal, Ronald, that's how it is with the entertainment industry. We should just accept it. Ronald didn't like it that Jack was being so unmotivated. Oh, what? Do you know? The most important thing for a celebrity is their value. Sure, your fan base is sturdy, but you're losing them quickly. All the newbies are starting to gain a lot of ground. If you don't work hard, you will be a nobody in 2 years, tops. He kept pacing back and forth. Have you been coming up with a new song like I asked you to? Jack answered nonchalantly. Sure. I'm doing it right now, so don't push me. I'm gonna lose this match at this rate. Ronald stopped pacing. I can't just count on you. I must call Noel and ask him to write some new songs for you, and interact with your fans on Twitter when you have time. Keep them interested. Jack went on playing his game in silence, but after Ronald went out, he put his phone down and put on a serious look. Then, he logged into his Twitter account to read through his fans' comments. Finally, he drafted one tweet, but in the end, he deleted it. Forget it. I'll just leave it like this. He got up and went out of the room. Every time the company's employees saw him, they would greet him respectfully. Hi, Jack. Jack nodded and went past them calmly. It was then he noticed Elise from the corner of his eye. She was on the balcony, of course. This line is hard, Elise. Samantha had a deep frown on her forehead. Elise took a look and said, break this into parts and memorize them that way. That might work better. Samantha did as Elise said. When she said the lines again, it sounded much smoother. Fancy seeing you here, Jack blurted. shocking Samantha and Elise. When Samantha saw who it was, she jumped with delight. You're Jack. She sounded excited, while Jack reacted to it calmly. He was used to getting recognized, so he just smiled and said, "Hello." Samantha was already gushing with delight. "Oh my God. I actually got to meet you." She took her phone out. "Can I get a photo with you?" Jack nodded. "Sure." Samantha was already buzzing. She went up to him at once, pointed her phone's camera at both of them and snapped their photos before posting them on her social media accounts. Elise looked at him. "I'm here with my friend. She has an audition. How did it go?" he asked. "It hasn't started yet," she answered gently. "It might take a while." Just when they were chatting, Ronald came over, looking happy. "Oh, there you are, Jack." He looked at the girls and nodded at them with a smile. Jack then told Elise, "I'll have to go. Good luck to your friend." He then left with Ronald. "What made you so happy?" Jack asked. Ronald answered jovially. "I just called Noel, and you know what he said?" Jack arched his eyebrow. Before he could ask, Ronald told him the answer. "He said he's going to get a new composer for you. Do you know who it is?" "It's H." "Yes, that famous one." Jack wasn't interested in the answer until H was mentioned. "H? The composer who only wrote 3 songs but still managed to top the charts for a year, the one who's still the talk of the town even after her retirement?" "Are you sure it's the same H?" Ronald knew Jack would be skeptical, so he nodded quickly. "Yes, that's right. Noel said he's friends with H, so if he can convince H, the leading track of your new album will be composed by H herself, the whole nation's going to know you when that happens. H's popularity alone will jack your album up to insane heights, but I thought H had retired a long time ago. Is she making a comeback?" Jack had his own doubts, and Ronald shared that doubt too. However, he thought, well, Noel said he can probably convince H. I bet he must have his own plan. "Don't worry. Noel said that the odds are in our favor, so all we have to do now is wait. I believe we will hear good news soon." The anticipation Jack felt earlier had completely disappeared since he didn't get a firm answer. H is so mysterious. None of the major media sites have managed to dig out any information about her even after so many years. How could he possibly resurface just because of me? That's completely impossible. Jack had completely lost all hope by the time he followed Ronald into the elevator. "By the way, do you know those 2 girls from earlier?" Ronald couldn't help but ask. "I do," Jack uttered with a grunt. Ronald recalled the glimpse of Elise and Samantha that he had caught earlier. Both of them have some potential, especially the taller girl. Her body proportions are perfect. It's almost as if she's made to be in the entertainment industry. Her face doesn't look that great, but she might be able to get into this industry if she does some minor plastic surgery. Jack knew that Ronald was referring to Elise. "That's Elise, the girl that I said I used to fancy," Jack uttered without any hesitation. "I might have overstepped my boundaries, then." Ronald immediately sealed his lips tight. On the other hand, it was Samantha's turn for the audition. Elise waited in the corridor for about 30 minutes before Samantha came out of the room. "How was it?" Elise asked in a concerned tone. Samantha simply shook her head. "No idea. The director told me to go back and wait for their announcement." "It's fine. Let's go back for now, then." Elise attempted to comfort her. Right when the 2 girls got back to school, Samantha received a call from the director's team. Elise, I was chosen. The director wants me to report to them next week. It's only a supporting role, but the director said that my role is relatively important, so I'll have to film for nearly a month." Samantha was euphoric, and happiness was written all over her face as she spoke. "Congratulations. You're getting to do what you enjoy." Elise was happy for her friend as well. "In celebration of this great news, I've decided that we're going to go for a karaoke session tonight," Samantha chirped. Elise didn't want to dampen her friend's spirits, and she didn't have much to do that night, so she agreed to go. "Let's ask Michaela and Riley to come along. We can go as a group of 4. Samantha thought that it was a good idea, so she gave Riley a call while Elise dropped Michaela a text. Elise gave Jonah a call after she was done inviting Michaela for that night. "I'm going out for some fun with my friends, Grandpa. I'll be coming home a little later tonight." Jonah's voice was full of care for the young girl. "All right. Send me your location, and I'll get the driver to pick you up later." Elise told him the address before they ended the call. All four of them thoroughly enjoyed themselves that night at Luxor Karaoke. Halfway through the night, Elise went to the bathroom. Clunk. Someone's lipstick fell right beside Elise's leg, and Elise instinctively bent down to pick it up. The owner of the lipstick was a gorgeous and well-dressed woman, and the woman uttered a polite thank you before she took the lipstick from Elise's hands. Elise didn't seem to mind the woman's haughty attitude. She continued staring at her reflection in the mirror, fixing her clothes and her makeup before she turned to leave. At that very moment, she heard the woman making a call. "Alexander, darling," the woman uttered. For some reason, the first person that popped into Elise's head was Alexander Griffith. However, after some thought, Elise realized how unlikely that would be. She therefore ignored the woman and strode out of the bathroom. Luxor Karaoke was a large place, and its corridors were rather long and windy. Furthermore, each of their rooms were about the same size, and Elise couldn't identify the room that she had been in earlier. She had made an entire round, and she was about to give Samantha a call when something caught her attention at the corner of her eye. It was an extremely familiar figure. "Alexander," Elise muttered. He didn't hear her at all. All of a sudden, the woman who had been in the bathroom earlier appeared and hurried over to Alexander. She planted a gentle kiss on his cheek before she slipped her arm into his. Alexander didn't look like he had any intentions of pushing her away. At that very moment, Elise felt a strong force coming from behind her, and her entire body was flung forward. She pushed the door open and stumbled into the karaoke room before falling face first onto the ground. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. "Yo, does this place provide women that will send themselves directly to your doorstep?" a man's voice came from inside the room. Elise was utterly embarrassed at that point. She wished she could dig a hole and stick her head into it. She hung her head low to pretend as if she didn't see anything that was happening in the room. "I think you might have gotten the wrong room, gorgeous," the same man's voice sounded as he strode toward Elise. Elise finally lifted her head. She knew she couldn't avoid him for much longer. The man's footsteps came to a halt as he stared at Elise. His Adam's apple moved up and down for a moment before he spoke in a completely different tone. "Where the fuck did you come from? Get the fuck out of here now," he growled. The man's tone of voice and his attitude were the complete opposite of how he first sounded and acted. Elise was too flustered to explain herself, and she hastily scrambled to her feet without turning to look in Alexander's direction. To her surprise, Alexander's voice filled the room the very next second. "What are you doing here?" She had no choice but to turn and smile at Alexander since he had recognized her. "What a coincidence. You're here too," the man beside her interrupted their conversation. "Do you know her, Mr. Griffith?" Alexander didn't answer the man but simply gazed at Elise quietly. The woman beside him spoke up instead. "She was the lady I bumped into in the bathroom earlier. She helped me pick my lipstick up." "Do you know her, Alexander?" Alexander pursed his lips as he continued to look at Elise. "She's Miss Elise Sinclair, one of the main shareholders of Griffith Group," he uttered slowly. "It seems like Miss Sinclair is here for work. Since Mr. Smith from Smith Enterprise is here today, we should go through some details regarding our partnership." Alexander's intentions were clear. He was indicating that he was there for work, and he was indirectly hinting Elise not to misunderstand anything. However, he didn't notice that he was explaining himself. The moment Theodore heard that Elise was one of the main shareholders of Griffith Group, he instantly wiped off the disdainful expression on his face. "I see, Miss Sinclair. Well, that was a unique entrance you made." Elise's cheeks turned beet red. She wanted to explain herself, but she ended up going along with Alexander's words since she didn't know what else to say. "Yeah. Since I'm here, let's confirm some of the details regarding our partnership." Mr. Smith, Tiffany Smith, who was sitting beside Alexander, didn't seem pleased by Elise's suggestion. "You agreed to sing a few songs with me today, Alexander. Since we're out for some fun, let's not talk about work-related matters." "Okay, that's right. Let's not talk about work as it's pretty rare for us to spend our leisure time together. Since Miss Sinclair is here, let's all have a few drinks together. We'll enjoy ourselves, just for tonight," Theodore said with a wide grin. However, Alexander merely smirked after hearing their words. "I'm sure you know that Miss Sinclair owns the largest portion of Griffith Group's shares now, Mr. Smith. Whatever Miss Sinclair says should take precedence. Since she's here today, I don't think it would be right for me to use work as an excuse to enjoy myself." Theodore quickly understood what Alexander meant. All of us are really busy with work in the daytime, Miss Sinclair. It's such a rare opportunity for us to relax a little. Why don't we have a few drinks before we start our discussion? We can talk about our company's partnership a while later. Theodore chuckled and glanced at Elise before he reached over and held onto her arm. He led her to a spot beside Alexander. Elise was about to protest, but Theodore didn't give her the chance to say anything. He simply called for the waiter and ordered a few more bottles of alcohol. Elise shot Alexander a glance, only to see him gazing at her with a rather enigmatic look in his eyes. Something seemed to click in her mind at that very moment. Mr. Smith, don't you think we should settle our contract before having our drinks? We'd be able to enjoy even more that way. Ultimately, Theodore was too impatient to listen to Elise's constant talk about their partnership and the contract. He finally gave in. Miss Sinclair, will we get to enjoy our drinks and music once we sign this contract? She nodded. Of course. We can only say that we have formed a partnership once we sign the contracts, right? I'll only feel safer once we document our agreement in black and white. Fine, Miss Sinclair. Hand me the contract. We have pretty much discussed all of the details with your company, so I'm sure the contract will look fine to me. We can sign it now, Theodore uttered impatiently. Elise hadn't expected Theodore to be so compliant. After sending Alexander a glance, she pulled a contract out of her office bag and handed it over to Theodore. Take a look at this, Mr. Smith. Theodore directly flipped to the last page of the contract and scribbled his signature on it. There. We're done now, aren't we, Miss Sinclair? The smile on Elise's face blossomed like a flower. Of course, Mr. Smith. Cheers. She held a glass up and clinked it against Theodore's before she finished her entire drink. A grin spread across Theodore's face. You're an independent woman indeed, Miss Sinclair. I respect you for that. He finished his drink before he turned to glance at Alexander. Miss Sinclair is no regular woman, huh, Mr. Griffith? I hesitated for a long while as I was uncertain if I wanted to sign the contract, yet it only took her a few sentences to convince me to sign the papers. She's a special lady indeed. You must be joking, Mr. Smith. Of course, Miss Sinclair is the central figure of Griffith Group, but I'm sure it was her sincerity that made you so willing to sign the contract, Alexander replied politely. Theodore chuckled once more. It's more than that, to be honest. One reason I agreed to this is because of my precious sister. Her feelings toward you are so obvious that even I, as her brother, couldn't bear to stand around and watch her. I had to do something. Tiffany seemed rather embarrassed by his words. What are you talking about, Theodore? Theodore hastily stopped himself from saying anything else. All right. I won't make any further comments. You know yourself best. When Tiffany shifted her gaze toward Alexander, her cheeks were as red as a tomato. Her large, shining eyes were fixed upon Alexander's side profile as she spoke. You don't need to listen to my brother, Alexander. You've always occupied a large space in my heart. Alexander narrowed his eyes. Are you saying that I have gained weight, Miss Smith? You make me sound as if I'm taking up all of the space in there, he spoke in a rather playful tone, and it managed to resolve the awkward atmosphere that had built up in the room. I guess you could think of it that way, Tiffany said with a soft giggle. I don't think I'm needed here, Elise thought. At that moment, she received a call from Samantha, which gave her the perfect reason to excuse herself. I have other matters to handle, Mr. Griffith. I should leave now. Theodore stopped her the moment she finished speaking. I'd feel rather offended if you left, Miss Sinclair. You're asking to leave when you just sat down. Did you just come here to sign the contract? Are you ignoring me now that the paperwork is done? You have misunderstood me, Mr. Smith. That's not what I meant to do at all. Elise hastily attempted to clear her name. He interrupted her. Words? If that's not what you meant to do, then you shouldn't be in a rush to leave. Let's have a couple more drinks. Elise had no choice at this point. She gave Alexander a pleading stare hoping that he would intervene, but he merely smirked at her without saying anything. In the end, Elise could only send Samantha a text explaining the situation she was caught in. Minutes later, Samantha showed up with Riley and Michaela beside her. The three of them rushed into the room. Are you okay, Elise? Samantha cried. The sight of three young and pretty ladies made Theodore's eyes widen. Could these girls be your friends, Miss Sinclair? He asked with a broad smile on his face. Samantha simply strode toward Elise before grabbing her arm. Let's leave now, Elise. Elise felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she took the first few steps to head out of the room. However, Theodore stopped them before that could happen. Since you ladies are here, why don't you guys just join our room? It's more fun than just a few of you girls being together in a room. All of us would enjoy more company. Without any hesitation, Samantha stepped forward to protect Elise. We're not interested in joining you guys. You look like someone with bad intentions. Elise felt the urge to give Samantha a thumbs up. It was the first time anyone had ever criticized Theodore for having bad intentions, and for some odd reason, he found himself attracted to Samantha's personality. Hey, young lady. We are all out here for some fun. Do you have to make me sound so bad? Since we got the chance to bump into one another, why don't we exchange our phone numbers? Samantha's face darkened as she felt she was being teased by the man. I'm not interested in exchanging numbers. Let's go, Elise. Theodore was about to stop them again, but Alexander called him just in time. Let's have a drink now, Mr. Smith. Theodore didn't wish to reject Alexander in front of everyone. He had no choice but to lift his cup for a drink with Alexander. By the time Elise and the rest of them left, only the three of them were left in the room. Initially, Tiffany's plan had been to spend some quality time with Alexander. However, after the incident with Elise, Alexander only seemed colder toward Tiffany than before. Tiffany had had no choice but to ask her brother for help. All along, Theodore understood Tiffany's intentions. He had been delaying the partnership with Griffith Group precisely because he wanted to create more opportunities for his sister. However, he hadn't expected to sign the contract after talking to Elise for just a few minutes. Theodore couldn't tell what was going through Alexander's mind, so he tried his luck with an invitation to drink. Mr. Griffith, we managed to sign the contract tonight, but we haven't gotten a chance to enjoy ourselves yet. Why don't we switch to another spot for more drinks? Tiffany can have a few more drinks with you. How does that sound? Alexander got to his feet. I don't think I'll be able to join today, Mr. Smith. I have some personal matters to handle. We can make plans to drink some other day. Alexander had made himself clear, and Theodore quickly understood the message. Alexander wasn't interested in Tiffany at all. Theodore wasn't a petty man, and he didn't attempt to coerce Alexander into anything since he had gotten a clear answer. No worries, Mr. Griffith. I'm sure we'll have tons of opportunities to meet again in the future. Tiffany stomped her foot, feeling annoyed. Why don't you spend a little more time with me, Alexander? But Alexander merely pulled himself away from her. I have other matters to handle, Miss Smith. I'll excuse myself now. Alexander strode out of the room, leaving the two siblings behind. They exchanged glances with each other before Theodore spoke up. Did you realize how Alexander's gaze shifted the moment Miss Sinclair entered the room? He didn't look away from her at all. Tiffany didn't agree with her brother. You've got it all wrong, Theodore. That woman is hideous. How could Alexander ever fall for a girl like her? You're offending Alexander by saying that. Upon hearing his sister, Theodore didn't make any further comments. From a male's perspective, I think it's extremely obvious that there's something special about the way Alexander looks at Elise. But Tiffany will probably get annoyed at me if I say anything, so I should just keep my mouth shut. Well, Alexander doesn't seem too interested in you. Perhaps you can find a new target, Theodore asked meekly. No. I think Alexander's the perfect fit for me, Tiffany replied in a firm tone. I have to be with him. I don't care how you do it, Theodore, but you need to make sure that we date each other in the end. She's truly fallen head over heels for a man this time, Theodore thought. The most I can do as her brother is to try to bring the two of them together. After Samantha successfully brought Elise back into their karaoke room, Elise had lost all interest in singing. All Elise could think of then was how Alexander and Tiffany looked as they stood together earlier. The same scene kept replaying in Elise's mind and refused to leave her alone. It was nearly midnight when the four of them finished singing their songs. How are you and Elise going home, Michaela? Samantha asked once they all stepped out of the karaoke center. Michaela glanced at her phone. My driver's picking me up in a bit. You guys can go ahead first. What about you, Elise? Samantha asked. Elise was just about to speak when a blaring car horn interrupted their conversation. Elise turned around to find Alexander's car stopped by the side of the road. My ride's here, so I'll leave now, she uttered while waving at the other three of them. Her ride sped past her three friends after she hopped into the car. Neither one of them said anything after Elise got into the car, and things seemed rather awkward between them for a while. Elise bit on her lower lip before she decided to break the Silence. Were you waiting for me? Alexander responded to her question while staring straight and steering the car. No. I ended about the same time as you did. He was clearly lying. He simply didn't want Elise to know the truth. You seem pretty close to Miss Smith. Did you guys know each other before this? She asked. Alexander raised an eyebrow and stole a glance at Elise in the rear view mirror. For some reason, Elise felt the need to justify her question. Don't misunderstand my intentions. I was just asking a random question. You don't have to answer me if you don't want to. Alexander shifted his focus back onto the road. She was my junior at university, so I have known her since then. Oh, Elise mumbled and fell silent once she got her answer. She hadn't realized the hint of jealousy in her as she posed him the question. Thank you for tonight. Theodore wouldn't have agreed to sign the contract if it weren't for you. I'm surprised you can be pretty smart in critical situations, huh? Alexander wasn't stingy with his compliments, and his words made Elise blush. I was just going along with what you said. I hadn't expected to actually help in getting the partnership contract signed, Elise muttered. All along, Alexander understood why Theodore had been taking his time to sign the contract. Alexander didn't want to expose his intentions, so Elise's presence made things much easier for him. Alexander narrowed his eyes. One way or another, I couldn't have done this without you. I owe you one. You can just let me know if you need any help in the future. All right, Elise replied with a smile. The car sped along the highway, and Elise glanced out the window as the night view of the city zoomed past them. Her spirits seemed to be lifted after that. Once she got home, Elise removed her makeup and took a shower. When she came out of the bathroom, her hair was still dripping wet. She was drying her hair with a towel when she heard the sound of a notification from her laptop. She walked over, and her laptop screen lit up. She read the email that had been sent from Alexander. Miss Sayre, the representatives from Eris will arrive at Athessia tomorrow. I'll send my assistant to go along with you, and I need you to greet them at the airport, Elise immediately said upright. The clicking sounds of her keyboard came to a halt after she responded with an okay. After drying her hair, Elise returned to her room and went to sleep. She woke up early the next morning and dressed herself in the usual, worn-out clothes that she often wore. Her outfit was as unpresentable as it always was, and she simply greeted Jonah before heading out of the house. After hailing a cab, she first stopped at a public washroom. Elise then went in and changed her entire outfit before heading to the airport. There you are, Miss Sayre. Cameron rushed over to greet Elise once she arrived. How long do we have until the representatives arrive? Elise asked. Cameron glanced at the time. About 30 minutes, let's go in now, then. We shouldn't keep them waiting, Elise urged. Both of them stood by the gates at the airport, but nearly 2 hours went by before the other party's plane finally landed at the airport. Cameron held a piece of cardboard up and waved it around. Soon enough, a pale-skinned, blue-eyed blonde strolled over to them. Were you guys expecting me? The woman's fluent derision came as a pleasant surprise to Elise. Hello, Miss Lily. You're finally here, she uttered with a smile. Lily gave Elise a perfunctory handshake. My team is coming out in a while. We can leave without waiting for them. Elise understood Lily's orders, so she led the foreigner toward the exit. Why didn't Mr. Griffith come today? Lily asked curiously. He's rather occupied with some other matters at work, but he will come over to greet you personally later. I'll escort you to check in at the hotel first, Elise replied politely. Lily chuckled wholeheartedly. Please remind Mr. Griffith to bring the red wine he promised me. I've been craving it. Elise had no idea what red wine Lily was referring to, but she responded appropriately anyway. Don't worry, Miss Lily. I'll make sure to pass the message to him. Soon after Elise and Lily arrived at the hotel, Cameron led Lily's staff over. Elise helped all of them to check in at the hotel, and she had just turned to leave the counter when Lily stopped her. Don't forget to ask for 2 room keys, Lily ordered. Elise didn't understand why Lily needed 2 room keys, but she acceded to her request and asked for an extra access card anyway. Once Elise delivered the access cards to the room, she took the elevator down and pulled her phone out to send Alexander a text. The content of the message was precisely what Lily had ordered her to remind Alexander. Elise didn't leave the area after that and simply stayed at the coffee house in the hotel to have a cup of coffee. About 2 hours later, Alexander arrived at the hotel. Mr. Griffith, Elise beamed as she greeted Alexander. He gave her a slight nod. Is Miss Lily downstairs yet? He asked. Miss Lily agreed to be here at 6 p.m. So I'm sure she'll be down soon, Elise replied. Alexander raised his wrist to look at the time. Let's head over first. Then, they walked over to the restaurant, with Elise following behind Alexander. All of a sudden, his footsteps came to a halt. Oh. Please go to my car and bring the red wine over. It's the one that Lily wants. I left it on my passenger's seat. He handed his car keys to Elise. As he spoke, she took the keys and turned to head to the parking lot. After collecting the red wine, she went back to the restaurant. By then, Lily had already come down and was talking to Alexander. They seemed to be enjoying their conversation, Elise thought as she watched them from a distance. Mr. Griffith, Miss Lily, here's the red wine you asked for. Lily took a glance at the red wine. How generous of you, Mr. Griffith, she uttered in fluent French. Elise was rather puzzled. Does Lily speak French? Alexander curled his lips into a smirk before he responded in French. He sounded just as fluent in the language as she was. As you like it, Miss Lily. Meanwhile, Elise stood by the side until Alexander turned to look at her. Take a seat, he offered. She quickly rejected him. It's fine, Mr. Griffith. I'll stand here, and you can let me know if you need anything. Alexander shot Elise a rather puzzled stare. He then shifted his gaze to Lily as he recalled how he had intended to discuss some work-related stuff with her. Miss Lily, I truly appreciate you traveling over to Athesia just to improve the work that we are doing together. I believe our partnership will be a fruitful one. Before Alexander could go on, Lily interrupted him. It wasn't necessary for me to travel here, Mr. Griffith. However, she gave him a cryptic stare that seemed rather seductive. There was something about this trip to Athesia that made me especially drawn to it. I believe we can talk about our work a while later. I'd prefer if I had some time to adjust to the time differences. First, since you're the host, why don't you arrange for us to do some relaxing activities? Alexander responded in a serious tone. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to do, Miss Lily? She beamed at him. I heard about this place called Glenwood Hills in Athesia, and that the hot springs there are pretty decent. Why don't we visit the hot springs tomorrow? Elise, who had been standing by the side, nearly choked when she heard what Lily said. This woman doesn't seem like she's here to talk about work. She looks like she's just here to seduce Alexander. I will get my assistant to arrange a trip to the hot springs if that's what you'd like, Miss Lily, Alexander uttered. Lily let out a shrill giggle. Perfect. Let's relax at the hot springs tomorrow, Mr. Griffith. We can bring Miss Sarah along as well. She can help provide us with some suggestions if we happen to talk about work. Elise, who was taken aback by Lily's sudden show of concern, stared at Alexander helplessly. His face was devoid of emotions, and Elise couldn't seem to tell what was going on in his mind. Well, I'm sure there isn't a single man on earth who can reject a gorgeous, fair-skinned blonde like Lily. Elise thought as she shifted her attention back to Lily. Alexander's a regular man after all, it's only normal that he feels attracted to Lily. For some reason, an uneasy sensation formed in Elise's chest. Throughout the night, there was a hint of contempt in her eyes whenever she gazed at Lily. Despite this, Elise didn't notice the shift that occurred within her. The next morning, Elise arrived early at the hotel to wait for Lily. Lily was a punctual woman, and she came down with her assistant at the time they agreed to meet. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, Miss Sarah, Elise smiled. It's fine. I just arrived as well. Lily got in the car with Elise, and they traveled over to meet Alexander. However, once they got there, they realized that it wasn't just Alexander who was in the car. Danny and Jack were there as well. Elise felt oddly self-conscious upon meeting the other two men, and she instinctively shied away from them. Jack had been rather moody the past few days, so he delayed his other jobs just so that he could step away for a short break to relax. He had intended to go on a short trip with Danny, but Alexander dragged the both of them to go to the hot springs with him at the very last minute. Danny still thought about Elise every now and then. He thought of asking her along, but he also considered how it might be rather troublesome for a girl to visit the hot springs with him. Both Danny and Jack didn't know that Alexander's trip to the hot springs was related to his business partnership, so both the brothers exchanged glances once they found out about the truth. What a waste of our good time, they both thought. Who are those two men? Do you know them, Miss Sarah? Lily leaned in and whispered in Elise's ear. Elise glanced at Jack and Danny while she replied to Lily's question. They are Jack and Danny, Both from the Griffith family. Lily raised an eyebrow as she smirked. Are they Mr. Griffith's brothers? Yes, Elise replied dutifully. The smile on Lily's face broadened as she took a seat. I didn't expect his brothers to be of such high standards. Elise had no idea what Lily meant, and she didn't think much about the woman's words either. Their ride made its way toward Glenwood Hills, which was located up in the north about an hour away from the city. Once they arrived at Glenwood Hills, Elise got out and gave Lily a brief introduction of the area. Alexander walked over, with Danny and Jack following behind him. What's she doing here? Danny was the first to notice Elise, and it came as a pleasant surprise to him. Who are you talking about? Jack asked. Danny pointed at Elise. Her. Elise, you must be blind, Jack uttered after gazing in the direction of where Danny was pointing. That's not Elise. Once Jack finished speaking, Elise turned around to reveal a face that was completely foreign to Danny. I thought it was Elise when I saw her from the back. It seems like they are just similar in size, Danny commented after processing his initial shock. Jack chuckled. You talk as if you're possessed. Why are you so deeply in love with Elise? Embarrassment spread across Danny's face as he gave Jack a light smack. That's nonsense, Jack. I just thought they looked alike. Jack chuckled without exposing his brother any further, and the both of them followed Alexander toward the hot springs. They then booked 2 separate hot springs since there were quite a number of them. Elise went along with Lily, while Alexander went with Danny and Jack. Once they were there, Lily took her clothes off to reveal her stunning figure. She lowered herself into the water before she turned to look at Elise. Aren't you coming in, Miss Sayre? Elise shook her head. She was worried that her makeup would fade if she went into the water. No, Miss Lily. You go ahead. Lily didn't insist any further and simply enjoyed her time in the hot springs. Miss Sayre, Lily uttered after a long while of silence. Can I talk to you about Mr. Griffith? Elise could tell that Lily was extremely interested in Alexander. What would you like to know, Miss Lily? Elise asked. Lily's large, twinkling eyes landed upon Elise after hearing her words. Well, based on what I heard before coming here, I understand that Mr. Griffith is currently single. You seem to really care for Mr. Griffith, Miss Lily, Elise commented. Lily chuckled when she realized that she could no longer conceal her actual intentions. It's true that I fancy Mr. Griffith, but I'm afraid I don't know him that well yet. I was hoping that you could tell me a little about Mr. Griffith's interests and hobbies, Miss Sayre, Elise responded with a polite smile. You must be kidding, Miss Lily. I'm nothing more than a subordinate. I don't think I'm at liberty to discuss anything related to my boss's matters. If you don't have any other orders, I'll step outside now, Miss Lily. I'll come in once you're done. Right as Elise was about to leave, Lily called out to her once more. It seems like you're not willing to tell me anything about Mr. Griffith, Miss Sayre. Regardless, I think it would be a shame if you were to just walk out without listening to the rest of what I'd like to say. What else would you like to say, Miss Lily? Elise tried to remain as patient as possible while Lily quietly scanned her from head to toe before speaking. Give me an amount. As long as it's something within my capabilities, I'll give you whatever you want. I can agree to keep it a secret. Your boss will never know about this. There wasn't even a slight change in Elise's expression as she spoke. Apart from our work, I don't think there's much to be said between both of us, Miss Lily. I'm sorry, but I think I should leave now. This time, Elise no longer hesitated. She turned and strode right out of the room. Lily was left alone in the water, her expression one of fury as she glared at Elise's receding figure. Elise let out a sigh after she stepped away from the hot springs. Phew. I finally managed to get rid of Lily. She's a pretty exotic woman, though. Other women might think of it as shameful to speak of such matters, but Lily didn't seem reluctant to do it at all. After stepping away from the hot springs, Elise walked to a garden opposite the area and sat down on one of the swings there. While sitting on the swing, Elise didn't notice the imminent threat creeping up behind her. She was casually swinging herself back and forth on the swing one moment, yet at the very next moment, a slippery, green object slithered over to her. Ah! Elise screamed in terror. Her face was drained of color when she saw what the creature was. A snake. If Elise had to pick one thing that she was the most terrified of in the world, her choice would always be the same. She was terrified of snakes, and there was a living, breathing snake just 10 feet away from her at that moment. Her entire body trembled with fear. Her first instinct was to run away from the threat, but her legs felt like they were drilled into the ground. Don't come here, save Me. Elise couldn't care less about how she looked then as she shouted at the top of her lungs. She shuffled a few steps backward when the snake raised its head. Elise hastily turned to run away, but her legs gave out, and she fell onto the ground with a loud smack. "Someone help me, save me," she continued to scream and shout as she watched the snake slither closer to her. At that critical point, a rock struck directly at the snake's mid-area, where its heart was located. The snake curled up into a ball as it twitched and jerked in pain. "Are you okay?" Alexander walked over to Elise, his voice filled with concern. Before Elise knew what she was doing, she threw herself into his arms and clung to his neck. Her entire body was shivering uncontrollably. Jack saw the incident from afar, and he hastily got the security workers to catch the snake. "I'm sorry, Mr. Griffith. You guys must have been really shocked," one of the security guards delivered his apology in a fearful tone. Alexander didn't respond to the guard and simply continued to pat Elise's back gently. "It's fine now, Miss Sayre. Someone got rid of the snake." However, Elise didn't seem to feel any better. She continued to cling tightly onto Alexander. He narrowed his eyes as he considered pushing her off of him, but he couldn't bring himself to do it in the end. Meanwhile, Jack gestured for the security guards to leave before he turned and looked at Alexander. "I'll head over there, Alexander." Jack turned and walked off, leaving Elise and Alexander alone at the pavilion in the garden. After what felt like ages, Elise finally stuck her head out to check if the snake was still there. The uneasy feeling in her chest finally disappeared once she made sure that there weren't any snakes near her. "All right. You're safe now," Alexander uttered. Elise shifted her gaze upward to meet his eyes, and it was only then did she realize how close their bodies were to each other. She hastily backed away from him as blood rushed up to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mr. Griffith. That was embarrassing." Alexander pulled his hands away from her. "I hadn't expected you to be so afraid of snakes, Miss Sayre. The snake you saw earlier was just a regular garter snake, and it wasn't poisonous at all." Elise didn't even want to speak about the snake at all. "Well, if there isn't anything else you need me to do, I'll head back to the hot springs now." Alexander nodded. "Go on. Please take good care of Miss Lily." Elise was on her way back when she recalled the rather unpleasant conversation that she had with Lily earlier. In the end, Elise decided to stop by the bar at the entrance of the hot springs. She ordered a drink for herself. A while later, Lily walked out of the hot springs with Alexander. Lily wore a smile that seemed to take up her entire face. There was no trace of anger from her conversation with Elise earlier. "The hot spring was lovely, Mr. Griffith. I really enjoyed it. Miss Sayre, in particular, was really thoughtful. You have a really capable assistant. It explains how you managed to dominate the markets for so many years, Mr. Griffith." Alexander, on the other hand, didn't smile as he responded to the woman. "You're too nice, Miss Lily. I've told my assistant to prepare some of Athesia's most famous dishes for dinner tonight. We can head over for our meal now." "Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Griffith," Lily replied with a smile. She took a few steps forward, leaving Alexander behind her. Elise seized this opportunity to approach him. "I won't be joining you guys tonight, Mr. Griffith. I have other matters to handle, so I'll head home soon." "All right. You can leave first," Alexander uttered while glancing at her. He didn't question her any further. After Elise got in the car that was heading back to the city, she couldn't seem to stop imagining scenarios of Alexander and Lily spending time with each other. Since Lily is interested in Alexander, I wonder if they'll. She smacked herself on the head when she realized what she was thinking about. "What the nonsense are you picturing in your head, Elise?" she whispered to herself. She tried her best to rid herself of all the wild thoughts running in her mind. After she completed her makeup and got herself changed, she returned to Griffith residence. She lay on the large bed and fixed her eyes on the ceiling above her. Images and scenes of her leaping into Alexander's arms emerged in her mind, and she could still smell his fresh, minty scent at the tip of her nose. She couldn't help but long for him at that moment. Elise rolled over, but she couldn't seem to get rid of the images of Alexander hugging her no matter how much she tried to do so. "What's up with you, Elise? Why can't you stop thinking about Alexander?" The next day, Elise dragged herself out of bed, her eye bags nearly extending down to her chin. She hastily covered her eye bags with some foundation when she saw her haggard reflection in the mirror. Once she walked out of the room and went downstairs, she found Alexander sitting on the couch in the hall. He had his legs crossed, and he seemed to be casually flipping through some documents. It was just a simple motion of flipping pages, yet he seemed to do it in an especially elegant manner. "You're here," Alexander muttered as he lowered the documents he had been reading. "We'll be late if we don't get there in 15 minutes. Let's leave now," he uttered after taking a look at his watch. He parted his long legs and headed toward the door, but Elise didn't follow him. He frowned a little as his footsteps came to a halt. "What is it? Why aren't you coming along? I just realized that I forget to take something. Perhaps you don't have to send me to school today. I can go on my own," Elise replied hastily. Before she could continue speaking, Alexander walked over to her. His lanky figure towered over her, and she seemed tiny in front of him despite the fact that she was 5'5". "I'll wait for you here," he uttered. She was about to say something else, but she could sense her heart pounding against her rib cage as she stood directly in front of him. She felt as if her heart was about to leap out of her throat, so she immediately turned around and hurried toward the stairs. Thud thud thud. She sprinted up to her room and shut the door behind her with a loud bang. Her chest was heaving as she pressed a hand against it. Her insides felt like it had been attacked by waves of panic, and the odd feeling she had sensed in the past came back to her once more. When she went downstairs again, she didn't even glance in Alexander's direction and simply took long strides past his figure. "Come on. I'm about to be late," she said. Alexander watched as Elise scampered away from him, and he curled his lips into a slight smirk before following behind her. For the first time, Elise didn't do her homework in the car. Instead, she leaned against the car seat and pretended to sleep. Yet, the slight flutter of her eyelids betrayed her act. "Did you not sleep well last night?" Alexander asked. Elise instinctively opened her eyes before shifting her gaze to look out of the window. She looked as if she had something to hide. "No. I had a pretty good sleep last night." Alexander glanced at Elise in the rearview mirror, but he no longer said anything. The car gradually came to a stop in front of the school gates. Before the car fully stopped, Elise hurriedly opened the door to slide out of the car. Alexander watched as her tiny figure disappeared in the crowd of students before he stepped on the gas and drove off. Once Elise reached the classroom, she started on her homework. She forcefully shoved aside the odd thoughts and feelings that were emerging in her. However, she was only on the second question of her homework when she heard one of her classmates calling for her by the classroom door. "Someone's looking for you, Elise." She raised her head. Despite her confusion, she put down her pen and walked out, only to find Jamie leaning against the classroom door in a relaxed manner. "I'm here, boss." He wore a cheeky expression on his face as he greeted Elise. Elise was obviously relieved to see him. "What are you doing here?" Jamie chuckled as he leaned closer to her. "Do I need a reason to come over and visit you, boss? But do you have a reason to be here?" Elise looked up into his eyes as she asked. Jamie avoided her gaze and looked at his surroundings instead. "Why don't we talk somewhere else, boss?" Elise followed him along a walkway in school that led to a field at the back. Jamie only began to speak then. "Boss, the annual French Grand Prix is happening soon. Are you interested in going over to watch the race?" 3 years ago, Elise had obtained the title as the champion of the international racing competition, and she had set an impossible record that hadn't been broken since. After shocking the world with her performance, she completely disappeared from the public's eye, and there wasn't any trace of her in the rest of the international racing events. Rumors claimed that new faces were emerging in the racing industry this year, so Jamie thought that he'd ask Elise if she was interested in watching. "Did you say that the French Grand Prix is happening soon? When is it?" Elise asked. "Next week. Although there hasn't been a single person who broke the record that you set, I heard that there's a seeded participant called White Wolf who has been winning a lot of races. I also heard that there are a few newbies in the racing industry who have pretty sick drifting skills. I think it'd be interesting to watch," Jamie replied. Elise pressed her lips together as she contemplated Jamie's suggestion. "If I go watch the French Grand Prix, I might be able to avoid Alexander for a while. I'll also be able to organize my messy thoughts and figure out all the feelings that I've been experiencing recently." "Do you want to go, boss?" Jamie asked again. "All right, I'm down. You can help me book the flight tickets," Elise uttered with a nod. Jamie was surprised that Elise had come to such a quick decision, and he had to swallow the rest of the script that he had prepared in order to convince her to go. "Great, boss. I'll do that immediately." Elise lowered her gaze as she began to think about the trip. "I'll just treat this trip to France as a break for me, and I'll watch the race just to relax a little." She was much happier after she made her decision, and the gloomy aura she gave off earlier had already disappeared when she returned to class. She continued working on her homework. I'm heading over to the company to collect my script later, Elise. Do you want to go along with me? Samantha clung onto Elise's arm while eyeing her pleadingly. Elise gazed at her for a moment before she seemed to recall something. Will you be going to Phoenix Entertainment? Samantha nodded rapidly. Yeah. I've already signed a contract with the production team, and I'll be joining them for the shoot from next month onward. It's a minor role, but it's also my first ever production, so it's pretty important to me, she explained. All right. I'll go with you then, Elise uttered as she slapped her textbook shut. Apart from accompanying her friend, Elise had something else that she wanted to do there. Once both of them arrived at Phoenix Entertainment, Elise followed behind Samantha as they went up the stairs. While Samantha went to collect her script, Elise strode over to Jack's office to find that it was completely empty. After contemplating for a short while, Elise decided to leave the copy of the music and lyrics that she had edited in Jack's room. After she put them on the table, she turned to leave. Elise had barely taken a few steps before Jack and Ronald walked in. Say, Jack, aren't you going to accept the job when the script is so good? This is one of the most trendy idol dramas right now. It might be a really good opportunity for you if you take the job. Look, Ronald. First, you tell me to focus on learning about music, then you ask if I'm accepting an acting job. What exactly do you want me to do? Jack interrupted Ronald before Ronald could continue. I just thought of you when I saw the script. You have a pretty empty schedule right now, so why don't you try it out? On top of that, we haven't heard from Noel so far, and we don't know when H will be able to come up with a new song for you. What would you do if H kept delaying the song? Ronald explained himself. Jack was starting to get frustrated. I can write the songs on my own. Give me some time, Ronald. I promise I'll write a song that you like. And the script? Ronald pursed his lips. Jack waved his arm to signal rejection. Just tell them I'm not interested. I haven't been thinking of acting since the start of this year. Ronald was caught in between. He could tell that Jack's mind was set, yet he thought that the script was too good of an opportunity to pass on. Ultimately, Ronald chose to support Jack. All right. You can focus on your music for now, don't worry. I'm sure I'll be able to succeed in the end if I persevere, Jack uttered. Ronald nodded. I believe you. Both of them exchanged glances, and they saw the trust in each other's eyes. Although Ronald felt like it was a shame to let go of a good script, he wanted to support Jack's decision more than anything. I should leave now, then. Don't stress yourself out, all right? You can go back to your music producing now. Ronald stepped out, and Jack was left alone in his huge office. He glanced out the window, looking as if he was deep in thought. After a while, he turned and walked to the piano room. He hadn't realized the piece of A4 paper that had been placed under his laptop. At night, Elise sat down in front of her laptop and stared at her chat history with Alexander. After hesitating for a moment, she finally typed out the message she wanted to send him. Mr. Griffith, I'll be going overseas in a few days' time. We'll have to stop the Origen classes for now, and I'll inform you once I'm back in the country. When Alexander received the message from Sarah, he didn't get the chance to respond immediately as someone knocked on his door just then. Cameron hurried into the room moments later. President Griffith, I have booked the flight tickets to France and the entrance tickets for the French Grand Prix. Here you go, Alexander nodded. You can leave them there. Cameron obediently placed the tickets by the side before he continued speaking. The president knows that you're going to France, and he specially requested for you to visit an old friend on behalf of him while you're there. This is his friend's address. He told me to pass it to you. Cameron pulled out a piece of A4 paper that had a series of French words written on it. Alexander frowned as he glanced at the French address. I don't think I've ever heard Grandpa talk about his friend in France. Well, I guess I should follow his orders since he's my senior. Just let Grandpa know that I'll be sure to visit his friend, Alexander finally uttered. Got it, President Griffith. I'll excuse myself now. Once Cameron left the room, Alexander shifted his focus back to Elise's message on his screen. I happen to be busy too. We can get in touch once you're done with your business, he replied. After sending the message, Alexander picked up the flight and entrance tickets that had been left on his table. He held it tightly in his hands while he glanced out of the window to look at the night sky. Fragments of the past flashed across his mind, and he thought, when will I be able to see you in an international competition again, Sue? 3 days later, Elise and Jamie boarded a flight to France. Before they took off, Elise removed her makeup in the airport's bathroom and returned to her usual self. She looked fresher and livelier once she was done. You're both pretty and cool when you're your usual self, boss. I don't understand why you prefer making yourself look like a complete loser. Jamie couldn't help but protest her actions. Elise merely smirked in response. What do you know? This is my way of experiencing life. In other words, you are also saying that I have really impressive makeup skills. Right, Jamie had to agree with her. As Jamie thought about their trip to France, another question popped into his mind. Boss, have you ever considered joining another international competition? He muttered. Elise didn't respond to his question this time. Let the past be the past, she said with a smile. After approximately 10 hours, their flight finally landed in Paris. It was already past midnight when they landed, and a gust of cold wind welcomed them the moment they stepped out of the airplane. Elise shuddered in response, and Jamie hastily took his jacket off to put it on her. I'm afraid you might catch a cold, boss, he uttered. A surge of warmth filled Elise. Thanks, brother, she replied. Jamie felt oddly bashful after hearing her words. You don't need to be so polite with me, boss. Let's go to the hotel first. We can drop by the manor tomorrow, Elise suggested. Jamie didn't have much of an opinion, so he followed Elise to the hotel. They each got a room for themselves. Don't forget to lock your door, boss. Try not to sleep too soundly. I'm worried for you since you're all alone, Jamie uttered as a reminder before they parted ways. All right. Don't worry. You should get some rest too. Good night, Elise replied in a reassuring tone. They both retired to their rooms. After being on a 10-hour flight, Elise was completely exhausted. She took a shower and fell asleep the moment her head touched the pillow. Elise only woke up when it was nearly noon the next day. She checked her phone to find a text from Jamie. I have some matters to handle, boss. You can go to the manor on your own. I'll see you at the race tomorrow. She checked the time of the message to see that it was sent at 8 a.m. It had been almost 4 hours since Jamie texted her. Okay, she replied through text. Before she knew it, Jamie had responded with a series of voice messages. Why did you sleep for so long, boss? The first one said. There's a restaurant in the hotel. Don't forget to eat, the second one said. Don't starve yourself. You'll get gastric, the third one said. Elise was speechless after listening to all his voice notes. Jamie, since when did you get so good at nagging? She finally replied through text. Once she sent the message, she put her phone aside and freshened herself up before ordering some food up to her room. That afternoon, Elise brought her luggage and hailed a cab to head to the manor in the tiny town of Provence. The manor was a piece of property she had purchased in France 3 years ago, and she had gotten professionals to care for it ever since. She hadn't visited the place in the past 3 years, so stepping into the manor made her feel as if she was entering a whole new world. Miss Sinclair, Elise turned to the source of the familiar voice, and she curled her lips into a pretty smile when she saw an equally familiar figure. Helene thought she had gotten the wrong person at first, but she finally trusted herself when she heard Elise's unmistakable voice. It's true. It's the person I've been missing for so long. It really is you, Miss Sinclair. You're finally back. Helen was clearly getting emotional as she had been waiting for Elise's return for the past 3 years. Now that Elise is really back, I can't be happier. Are you guys doing okay? Elise asked. Helen nodded rapidly. Yes, of course. We're all great. The old woman has been asking for you, and everything's going well with Linus. Prince just gave birth to a whole lot of puppies. I'll update you about everything else once you come into the manor. Both Helen and Elise held hands as they strolled into the manor. All of the maids hurried over to help Elisa carry her luggage. Hello, Miss Sinclair, welcome back, Miss Sinclair. All of the maids took the initiative to greet Elise. While Elise was smiling back at them, a white dog wagged its tail while rushing over to her. Joy spread across Elise's face as she knelt down to pat its head. You're so big now, she exclaimed. Helen smiled as she gazed at Elise. I clean your room every day, and I have changed brand new sheets for you. You can rest for now. I'll tell the kitchen to prepare dinner, Helen uttered. Elise merely nodded in response. Okay. Thank you. After that, Elise lifted Prince, the dog, into her arms and strode toward the second floor where her room was. Once she was in the room, Prince flailed its paws as it wanted to be put down, so Elise lowered it before she walked toward the windows. She opened a window and looked out to find stretches of lavender fields that painted the ground a sharp purple color. A warm smile found its way to Elise's face as she thought, "Everything looks just the way I remember it to be." At the exact same moment, on the foot of another mountain in Provence was Alexander, a piece of paper in hand. He checked the address and made sure it was right before he pressed the doorbell of the manor. A maid opened the door and automatically spoke in French when she saw an unfamiliar face. "Who are you looking for, sir?" Alexander responded with equally fluent French. "Is this where Mr. Burton lives?" The maid's eyes lit up when she heard his question. "You must be our beloved guest, Mr. Griffith." The maid spoke in English this time. She let him in after he gave her a polite nod. "Please get into the carriage, Mr. Griffith," one of the maids uttered politely. Alexander eyed her puzzledly. "Where exactly are we going, Mr. Burton ordered us to bring you over once you arrive. You'll know where we're headed once you're there," the maid explained. Alexander got into the carriage, and the coachman steered the horses onto a tiny pathway. This gave Alexander the opportunity to enjoy the view outside the manor. It was a huge piece of land. He couldn't see the other end of the road even if he tried to. There were grape trellises along the way, and they were covered in green and purple grapes. There were sunflower fields that had their yellow faces pointed toward the sun. What caught Alexander's eyes the most was the purple lavender fields that looked as gorgeous as a painting. "We are here, Mr. Griffith." The coachman halted the carriage in front of a castle. Alexander felt a surge of curiosity when he saw the castle before his eyes. "Who exactly is Mr. Burton? Why haven't I heard Grandpa talk about him in the past?" Alexander got out of the carriage with his eyebrows raised. Elise was wheeling her bicycle with one hand while she held onto a kite with another. She was strolling in front of the castle while her precious dog, Prince, tottered along behind her. "I'll bring Prince out to play with the kites, Helen. I'll be back in a while." The moment Elise finished speaking, Helen's voice came from inside the castle. "Remember not to run too fast, Miss Sinclair. Don't come back too late." Elise hopped onto her bike and held onto her kite with one hand as she cycled onto a small pathway. Alexander narrowed his eyes when he saw Elise's figure from behind. "That girl seems rather familiar." He was about to say something when Elise turned to look directly at him. Alexander let out a rather exasperated sigh. "I'm overthinking this. How could it be possible for Elise to show up here? They just look alike, that's all." Elise, on the other hand, was utterly shocked when she saw Alexander. Her brain froze as she lost control of her limbs. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as she watched herself losing control of her bike. "Get out! Get out of the way!" she cried as her bike charged downhill. While she was screaming, Alexander turned around to see the bike speeding directly toward him. At the very last second, Alexander leaped forward and caught Elise in his arms. Both of them rolled on the ground a few times before they stopped. Alexander felt an odd sense of familiarity as he held onto Elise. He was about to say something when Elise shoved him aside and took a few steps back. I'm sorry. It was an accident." She intentionally looked sideways to hide her face as she scrambled to her feet. "I'm sorry for hitting you." "I'm sorry." After apologizing for the 100th time, Elise hurried off to collect her bike before Alexander could respond to her. He stared at the girl in front of him. All of this feels too familiar. If it weren't for her face, it's almost as if Elise had possessed this girl's body. "It's fine," he managed to squeeze the words out of his lips. Elise was too afraid to stay for even an extra second, and she hastily picked her large bicycle up before walking away. Prince, on the other hand, wagged its tail as it walked to Alexander. It rubbed its head against Alexander's leg in a sincere manner, as if it were thanking Alexander. He couldn't help but pat the dog's head when he saw the adorable creature. To his surprise, the dog ran off just moments later. "Are you okay, Mr. Griffith?" the maid asked. "I'm fine. Let's go in." The maid led Alexander into the castle, and Elise was left dumbfounded as she watched this happen. It's already a shock for her that he is here. "I can't believe he's entering my castle. He can't be here to look for me, right? It doesn't seem like it." Elise pressed her lips together as she decided to observe the situation for a while longer. Helen was the first to spot Alexander when he walked into the castle. "This is Mr. Burton's guest, Mr. Griffith." The maid introduced Alexander to Helen. Helen responded with a warm smile. So, you're Mr. Griffith. I've heard loads about you, she uttered cheerfully. Alexander responded in a polite tone. Hello. Can I know if Mr. Burton is here? Yes, he is. You came from Athassia, didn't you, Mr. Griffith? Please wait here for a while. I'll get him to come now, Helen offered. She ordered the maids to prepare coffee while she hurried to the entrance to give Linus a call. At that moment, Elise sneaked out from somewhere and held onto Helen's arms. Who is he, Helen? What is he doing here? He's Linus' guest, Helen explained. Linus told me about him a few days ago, saying that he had a friend who'd be arriving from a faraway country. Elise didn't know what to do at that point. She had to ensure that she wasn't exposed. I think you guys should stop calling me Elise from now on, Helen. Why don't you call me the name I used to tell you guys about, Joy? Helen didn't bother to ask. For a reason. Sure, my darling Joy, she replied with a smile. Please help me inform everyone else as well, Helen. Please tell them not to call me Elise for these few days and call me Joy instead. It's crucial that they do so, Elise uttered. Helen found Elise's orders rather odd, but Helen had always been extremely compliant when it came to Elise. She did everything that Elise wanted her to do. Don't worry. I'll pass the message. After thanking Helen, Elise no longer had the mood to fly her kite. The main reason she traveled to France was to avoid Alexander for a while, yet fate was such a peculiar thing. They somehow ended up in the same place even in another country. Linus noticed Alexander's unique and attractive aura once he walked in. You must be Mr. Jonah's grandson. Huh? He uttered with a smile on his face. And you must be Mr. Burton. I'm Alexander. Nice to meet you, Alexander said in a humble tone. Linus let out a hearty laugh. I've been hearing a lot about that old man's outstanding grandson. He told me he'd come over and introduce you to me personally. Why didn't the old man come along? Why?
Subscribe. Like, comment, share.